In order to do this next assignment, we're going to need these things, right? We're going to need some type of ruler. You might even use two. Here I have a smaller one. If you have something lying around, it could be similar. You could also always just use any straight edges, to be honest, because sometimes these longer rulers, this one is an 18-inch ruler, but sometimes the longer ones are a little bulky. So sometimes helpful to have more than one. And these other things from our drawing kit, simple eraser. We have a pencil sharpener if we need it. I'm just using this really basic number 2 pencil because I don't want to use up all the nice graphite in our nice ones. And then here just our X-Acto knife. Okay. And so other things that we're going to need, right? Bristol paper. And it might actually be nice to have some scrap paper, even just copy paper. If you have any lying around, it can be anything, honestly. But it might be nice just to get some ideas across on some scratch paper or a sketchbook if you have it. Even just some simple cutting and folding techniques, which is what we're going to do, would be nice to use on something that, again, is kind of, you could throw away afterwards if you don't want it. And we don't have to waste a nice Bristol. Okay, so first thing I want everyone to think about is how we can take those ideas, some of the things we've been building on in the previous assignments, and now to create something three-dimensional. In order to do that, we'll start with just some type of 2D diagram, some type of 2D outline. You might want to start with a graphic or a geometric pattern that could be interesting to you. It could be something that maybe you found interesting on your last assignments, right? If you started to look at something in the abstract composition from your still life, you start to look at some of those geometric patterns. It could have been something brand new, right? And so sometimes you could even just do some Google searches, right? Just to get some ideas, right? You can look at some of the examples I showed, or you can even just look up, what are some geometric patterns, right? So say, for instance, we just did that. Typed in geometric patterns. This might be a good starting point for you to look at. Maybe find something just as a 2D graphic that could be interesting to you that might translate well into a 3D graphic, 3D sculpture. And you might not know yet what that is, right? So it might take a little bit of experimentation. I'll probably recommend that you try maybe a couple different ways of doing that. Maybe you try like 3 different iterations before you decide on something. And that's why we have this scratch paper here. So we'll go ahead and get started with an idea. And say we think of something in our sketchbook. If you have a sketchbook, this was something that I just quickly sketched up. It's not even very neat or clean, right? Just kind of this idea of, I don't know, these alternating triangles, right? There's some type of pattern in here, right? I was just looking and I was like, okay, maybe there's a grid. But it could be anything, right? This is just to get ideas across. You could do this anywhere. Say we have our sheet of paper. We're going to be working in the end on a 9x12 sheet of Bristol. So you can just start to think about, okay, pick a geometric pattern. Maybe it's something that has circles, right? This one over here has these triangles. Maybe we then try something with circles that could be helpful for us. So what if this whole thing is just a series circles that we cut and fold to create a three-dimensional pattern. This isn't anything exact, right? This is just idea generating right now. And any of these things could turn into something interesting. They could also turn into something not interesting, right? And that's okay. Because we're just trying to think and we're trying to experiment with different ways of representing a 2D graphic, some 2D geometry, representing some of those design principles in 3 dimensions. All right, so let's give it a try and we'll get our materials together. So let's start laying these out for real. And do that on a scrap piece of paper first. Now we'll switch back over to the pencil, something more easily erasable. And I think since we sketched it out, again, I sketched it out on my sketchbook. You could use the scrap paper, but since I already did that, I think I'm going to jump right in to a Bristol paper. Okay, so rip yourself one Bristol. And we'll go ahead and get started. So if I look back on the sketch, right, we'll start roughly with this idea, right, with this, looks like we have 4 boxes, right, subdivided boxes by 6, and we can go ahead and start dividing up the paper. This is where it's helpful, again, to have that ruler handy. One other thing to note, you see I have my, we're going to be doing some cutting, obviously. I do have my cutting mat here. If you don't have a cutting mat, you can use anything. This is just a Home Depot box. In this case, a couple layers of it. But something will do. Cardboard, you can be in the back of your Bristol pad. You will need a cutting mat, so something that you're not worried about damaging completely, because you don't want to cut yourself. You definitely don't want to be cutting any of the table surfaces, right, underneath you, in case this is like, you know, somebody's valued heirloom, right? So we want to keep whatever is, whatever underneath we're cutting safe, as well as yourself safe at all times, right? So that's just a side note. So what we're going to do is we're first going to lay out the geometry for what we want to cut, and then we'll figure out, again, what areas of that are we going to cut. And this is why it's, again, this is a little bit of an experimental thing. We don't necessarily know that yet. So we know this is 12 inches. If we can mark this off every 2 inches, that's just roughly based off of the sketch, right? That we had 6 boxes. And that wasn't a, you know, we might change our mind as we go with some things. That's just kind of what happens. But this will be a good starting point, okay? So I just marked off every 2 inches. And I'm going to start gridding this out to give us, again, some of that organization for our composition. As we're doing this, we should be thinking about those principles of design that we just talked about, right? Balance, unity, repetition, variety, rhythm. What else? Talked about emphasis, contrast, and then always important to think about scale, composition, proportion, all those things.